A mission so daring, it sounds like a scene straight out of a Hollywood movie. Maybe it is. In World War II, a group of brave soldiers carried out a plan that could have been written by Quentin Tarantino himself. You might remember the Inglourious Basterds, where Jewish troops sneak behind enemy lines to take down Hitler and the Nazis. Crazy, right? Believe it or not, however, something not too different indeed happened in history. This is the account of the real-life version of those daring missions called Operation Greenup. In the movie by Tarantino, a U.S. Army lieutenant called Aldo Raine puts together a unit of Jewish American soldiers to go on a mission of infiltrating enemy territory and retaliate against the Nazis internally. It is their mission to instill fear of the German army through the guerrilla tactics and sabotage behind enemy lines. Although the tale is a fictional work with overstated heroics and movie appeal, it is loosely based on actual war efforts, which were equally bold, but much more realistic in their presentation. The facts and reality behind the stories such as this were based upon the covert missions that the Allies had conducted in World War II. Instead of movie-style rampage, these missions depended on intelligence and trickery and a force of courage that was astonishing. The Allied forces tended to take people who had particular linguistic talents or cultures that could be easily used as infiltrators. One of the most determined was the Jewish refugees, those who had escaped the Nazi persecution and who now returned to Europe in order to foster intelligence and sabotage infrastructure, as well as sabotage the German war machine internally. Among the most prominent of these endeavors was the Operation Greenup, which was executed in the latest stages of the war. Planned by the Office of Strategic Services OSS, the predecessor to the modern-day CIA, this mission put a small group of agents, two of whom were Austrian Jewish refugees, back into the middle of the Third Reich. Their missions were not only to acquire important intelligence about the movements of German troops, but also to disrupt communication channels and ensure strategic damage that was to be caused by the outgoing Nazi troops as the war was about to come to an end. The success of Operation Greenup was a great one. The operatives saved the lives of thousands of people and prevented needless destruction of some of the critical areas in Western Austria through their resourcefulness and gallantry. Their efforts proved that the mute, but no less important work of spies and fighters of resistance may change the course of history as much as the victories on the battlefields. Though such heroics can be dramatized by the movie-making industry to provide entertainment, the actual life stories of these heroes can be seen as a potent reminder of the ingenuity and courage that characterized the Allied struggle during the World War II. The success of Operation Greenup was due to the boldness and will of three extraordinary men who, with their different background, formed the basis of one of the boldest intelligence operations of World War II. The former was Frederick Mayer in 1921 and of German birth. He and his family were victims of the anti-Semitism wave that was increasing and had cast a dark cloud on his early life because of the Nazi regime. Although his father had served in the German army earlier in his life, an element that the family of Frederick at one time had hoped could possibly save them the persecution, it did not help them to escape the hate and discrimination. Just in time, Mayer escaped to the United States, where he could find a new life without the oppression that he had experienced in Europe. As the Japanese onslaught on Pearl Harbor pulled America into the war, Mayer's sense of duty to fight against the oppression that had uprooted him was shaken not even at all. He joined the United States Army, where he soon gained a reputation of being intelligent, resourceful, and able to stand firm under any pressure. The Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor of the current CIA, was also in dire need of recruits who could carry out operations surreptitiously over enemy lines. And that is where these qualities came in. Mayer was a perfect choice to be in espionage because he had first-hand experience in Germany, and he speaks the language. Franz Wijnberg, the other member of the trio, was a Dutch Jew who was born in 1922. The brutality of occupation by the Nazis also found its reflection in his life. His parents got taken captive on the invasion of Germany to the Netherlands, where they were transported to a concentration camp. An incident that changed Wijnberg greatly and determination to join the fight against the Nazi regime in any manner. Later, he fled to the United States, joining the U.S. Army, and applied his language skills to the war effort of the Allies. His multilingualism in the European languages and his sight into the local cultures immediately made him study and catch the attention of the OSS, who knew he was capable of intelligence and also working in the field. The last team member, Franz Weber, had a completely different background, yet had the same ideology against Nazi tyranny. Weber was born in 1920 in Austria and became a member of the German army in the Anschluss that had forcibly taken his country to the Third Reich. But his increasing disappointment at the Nazi ideology eventually saw him cross to the Allied camp in 1944. This close familiarity with the land of Austria, local dialects, and military activities made him a good asset to the OSS. Weber, together with Mayer and Wijnberg, gave the team the professionalism it would have in the core of Operation Greenup, an effort that combined bravery, prowess, and moral determination in one of the most extraordinary espionage operations of the war. Their mission was critical: to probe disturbing reports that the Nazis were preparing their last stronghold there. A small Allied team was told to make a parachute landing deep in the Austrian Alps, near Innsbruck. This supposed mountain fort, which was ominously called the Alpine Festung, or the Alpine Fortress, was supposed to be a well-defended redoubt in which senior officials and soldiers could re-marshal and extend the war. Their work demanded more than courage. It needed the extreme secrecy. They were to observe the movements of the enemy, to make observations of their movements, and to sabotage without noise any operations which could in any way fortify the German position in the mountains. The drop itself was perilous. It was the tread of the night, and the team were in a blinding snowstorm, and fate gave them a severe punishment as they landed not on solid ground but in an ice lake more than 10,000 feet up in the Alps. Their effects compelled them to leave behind most of their gear, including important equipment of survival such as skis and communication equipment. They were shivering and half frozen and were pushing through the waist-deep snow towards a safe house which had been previously laid by Allied contacts. Each step was hard with exhaustion and cold, which was not an option to step back. After they were safe, the operatives started to install their system of working covertly. In order to protect their communications, they employed code names and a superb map switch technique inspired by the grid of the streets of New York City, a gimmick that enabled them to mask operational areas as harmless city address. In this system, they would be able to organize movements without suspicion by the German patrols. Psychological tension was always present, but discipline and experience were used to decide on every appointment they made. Mayer was able to enter Innsbruck undercover as a German officer, and some language fluency and ice-cold composure were required to do this. His fake identity provided the team with important intelligence regarding logistics of the troops and defensive planning. The family of Franz Weber was in favor of the Allies, and they were at risk of their lives carrying coded messages through the occupied territories. And Wijnberg was keenly carrying radio messages to the Allied command. Their cooperation would give a unique and priceless insight into the Nazi intentions in the Alpine region, demonstrating that bravery, even in the circumstances of being alone, could reverse the fortunes of intelligence work during the end of the war. Found a munitions plant that was hidden in the midst of the enemy, and this plant was a secret one 3 weeks into his mission. Understanding the importance of this, he chose to penetrate the plant as a French electrician in the hope of getting intelligence about what weapons were being manufactured in the plant. He was able to pass through the first levels of security using his forged credentials and having a good command of the language. Fate, however, was presently against him. The news got out that some of the local resistance was captured, and within days his well-established network was lying bare. Mayer was detected before he could get away. Hence, he was soon captured by the German troops. On landing in the enemy country, Mayer was tormented under merciless questioning and the most savage tortures in attempts to extract some clue to his mission. Although he was causing him torture, he did not give in and betray his comrades or expose the actual scope of the operation. His captors became more impatient, and they saw in him both rebellion and training, which suggested a trained agent. As the OSS agent who had been thrown into jail was introduced to point him out, the man knew Mayer, but knew how dangerous it was. The agent thought on his feet and said that Mayer was not a spy, but an officer of high rank, whose identity could not be compromised, and that any injury to his captors would arouse a violent retaliation. The clever deception worked. Instead of having Mayer executed like an ordinary agent, the Germans chose to detain him to the higher authorities. He was later handed over to Franz Hofer, a Nazi district leader located in the Tyrol. Hofer, who already had a feeling that Germany was on the verge of defeat, had already started to ease his position in the hope that he could receive some leniency. Post-war. Finding it convenient, and perhaps hoping to procure himself a future, Hofer had seen to it that the prisoner should be treated with an unusual measure of deference and tenderness. With this new order, Mayer gained some freedom. He even met with his team under supervision. He transmitted through covert means important information concerning the activities of the plant and the degrading morale of the enemy. The development of what seemed at first a fatal exposure was, however, a stroke of luck. It furnished his side with information of vital importance and caused the capture of Mayer to become a chance in his favor in the last days of the war. The day of May 3rd, 1945, in the city of Innsbruck, marked a great moment at the very end of the World War II. Instead of disintegrating into anarchy and bloodshed when the German front broke, the local German troops opted to give up peacefully. The fact that majorly contributed to this was due to the negotiation undertaken by Frederick "Fred" Mayer, who was bold enough to make sure that no unnecessary fighting broke out in the city because of his diplomatic nature. His mediation saved not just lives to both parties, but also saved Innsbruck the devastation that accompanied the latter battles of the war in the rest of Europe. His success was a great witness to the importance of diplomacy in the midst of war at a time when, in most cases, desperation meant ruin. It was also a larger intelligence operation dubbed Operation Greenup, where Allied agents would go deep behind enemy lines to conduct a risky operation. Among the main discoveries of its revelations was the disclosure of the so-called Alpine Festung, or Alpine Fortress, as such an illusion. Nazi had been attempting to persuade the world that they were building an invincible fortress in the Alpine region where they would defend themselves. Nonetheless, this alleged fortress was actually a deception, as the information collected by the spies showed. Going by the actual facts, Hitler and his top leadership never actually possessed the resources and capability to construct such a defensive stronghold. Towards the end of the war, the infrastructure of Germany was falling apart, and the manufacturing industry had been severely decreased due to the continued bombing by the Allies. There was barely any manpower, fuel, or supplies, and it was impossible to do any large-scale construction. Notwithstanding these restrictions, the Nazi propaganda still relied on the myth of the Alpine Festung as a way of encouraging the morale of German military forces and also misleading the Allies into believing that the Austrian fortification was in good condition. The victory of Operation Greenup, as well as the surrender at Innsbruck, therefore, had a tactical and symbolic meaning. They affirmed that the Alpine Fortress was a hoax that was meant to buy time and create confusion, and not a true final front of Nazi Germany. By their deeds, Mayer and his colleagues not only prevented the further loss of suffering, but they also contributed to the lifting of the veil of misconception concerning the end days of the war that represented the crumbling state of the Third Reich. Exactly as it was, the war had stopped. Frederick Mayer came back home in Brooklyn and was set to start a new life in the civil life. He secured a stable job in a nearby power plant, and thus spent several years of his life there, slowly restoring his life after the mess of the conflict. In addition to his work, Mayer spent the majority of his spare time on community services and volunteered in different causes and sponsored the veterans organizations. His contributions and heroism during and after the war made him be greatly respected by the people who knew him. Several years after, his efforts of valor during war were rewarded as he was awarded of his service. He went on to live a life characterized by humility and service till he passed on in 2016. Hans Wijnberg went another way after the termination of hostilities. Because of his interest in knowing the world based on science, he enrolled in a higher learning institution, and he slowly grew to be a well-respected person in the academic world. His study and educations made a remarkable impression on his students and his peers over the years. The career led to professional and personal satisfaction in the life of Wijnberg, since he gained the reputation of being an intellectual and honest person. His contribution as a scientist and professor was left even after his death in 2011. And he is remembered by many as a brilliant mind who was influenced by both war and peace. Franz Weber, in his turn, preferred staying at Innsbruck, to which the city his life had been so strongly connected before and after the war. He was determined to make an impact to the community and become a part of the civic society. Hence, he joined the local police force, with which he served his way up to the rank, becoming the police chief of the city. Not only did his leadership and sense of work go well beyond law enforcement into the field of politics, but also in politics, he still managed to play a role in the local affairs impartially and diligently. Weber was a very active person in his community, and he had lived the life of service in his city and country, and had died in the year 2001. Operation Greenup was not a single effort in the World War II. It was among the numerous incredible Allied intelligence and commando actions that were directed to the Nazi activity all over Europe. The most remarkable of these was a British troop called X-Troop, and it was very daring and enterprising. These commandos had specialized linguistic and cultural knowledge in the battlefield because they were composed mainly of Jewish refugees who had fled persecution under Hitler regime. Their experience allowed them to get deep into enemy territory and collect valuable intelligence at the cost of huge personal losses. Among their contributions that were most notable was their contribution in the capture of a German Enigma cipher machine that immensely helped the Allies in their decoding tasks of German communications. Besides, X-Troop had a big part in the extensive deception operations preceding the D-Day invasion, and thus it played a significant role in making the deception operations successful by misleading Nazi troops on the actual point of Allied landing. So that is it. Operation Greenup, a real-life story of heroism, ingeniousness, and sacrifice that can be compared with any Hollywood movie. It is a strong point of recall about the actual heroes behind legends. Thanks for watching. Also remember to like, share, and subscribe to more amazing history stories.